It was just another Friday night shift for me delivering a pizza, cruising through dimly lit streets with the aroma of fresh pizza smell going throughout my car, unknowing that that night would turn out to be one of the most scariest, and one that would make me question every dark road I travel alone on from then on. The order came in for a delivery to some remote place tucked away in the depths of a backcountry road. It was the kind of place that even Google Maps had trouble locating precisely. Nonetheless, I punched in the address and set off, relying on my trusty GPS to guide me through the twists and turns of the unfamiliar roads. As I drove deeper into the night, the houses became less, and the trees seemed to lean in closer, casting eerie shadows across the road. My headlights cut through the darkness, but they only seemed to illuminate a fraction of the surrounding wilderness. It was the kind of darkness that made your skin crawl, as if unseen eyes were watching your every move. About halfway to the destination, my car started sputtering, a dreaded sign that something was amiss. I pulled over to the side of the road, cursing my luck as I realized I was in a dead zone with no signal on my phone. Panic started creeping in as I weighed my options. I could leave the car and walk to find help, but that would mean leaving behind the precious cargo of hot pizzas and my belongings for someone to come along and possibly steal. With a sigh, I resigned myself to wait it out, hoping that a passing car might offer assistance. Hell, that's if anyone came, because it seemed like I was out in the middle of nowhere, and time seemed to slow down as I sat there, the silence broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl or rustle of leaves in the wind. It was then that I noticed something odd, a faint scratching noise coming from outside of my car, as if something was scraping against it. At first, I dismissed it as just the wind playing tricks on my mind, but as the minutes ticked by, the scratching grew louder and more deliberate. It was as if someone or something was dragging sharp claws or a knife along the sides of my car, and they or it were going all around it. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was probably just a raccoon or some other nocturnal creature, but then I heard something, a low noise, the sound of growling, or at least that's what it sounded like, and it terrified me. As I sat there in my car, vulnerable, with no protection, I know it was a stupid thing for me to do, but I poked my head out of my window slowly to see if I could spot something or someone. And that's when I noticed something that had me just about crap myself, and that's when I seen the scratches on my car. Deep gouges marred the once pristine paint, as if something had circled my vehicle, testing its defenses. Fear gripped me like a vice as I realized I was not alone out there. Whatever was in the darkness was toying with me, taunting me with its presence. I pulled out my phone, desperate for a signal to call for help, which at that very second I had 3 bars, and even though I was shaking like I was having a seizure, I managed to dial the number for a tow truck, praying that they would arrive before whatever was out there decided to reveal itself to me. As I waited for what felt like an eternity, the scratching and growling continued non-stop, driving me to the brink of madness. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking menace, and I found myself constantly checking the locks on my doors, as if that would keep out whatever the hell that was stalking me on the outside. But finally, after what felt like forever, the distant rumble of an engine broke through the silence, signaling the arrival of the tow truck guy. Relief flooded through me as I saw the headlights take away the darkness, lighting up the shadows that had once surrounded me. I practically leaped out of my car, eager to escape this nightmare. The tow truck driver was a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor who noticed the fresh scratches all over my car, but he didn't say anything. He just hooked up my car without asking too many questions, probably used to dealing with stranded motorists in the middle of nowhere. As we drove back toward civilization, I couldn't help but look back at the dark expanse of the trees receding in the distance, thankful that I was no longer sitting there. To this day, I can't get rid of the feeling that something evil lurks in those woods, something that preys on the unsuspecting like a hungry predator. And every time I deliver a pizza to a remote location, I get scared thinking about sitting there alone, not knowing what or who was toying with me, and what they or it was planning to do once gaining access to my car. It was a chilly evening, the kind that keeps you cold and always shivering even when you're bundled up in layers. Anyways, as a pizza delivery guy, I was used to navigating the streets of the city, but tonight's delivery took me far from the familiar glow of the streetlights and into the heart of darkness. The order came in for a pizzard, a particular combination of pizza and risotry that I had never heard of before. The address led me to a secluded house somewhere deep in the woods, with a driveway that felt like it went on forever, and it was a place that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The sticks on the dirt driveway leading to the house crunched under my tires as I approached, my headlights cutting through the pitch black that surrounded that entire place. As I parked in front of the house, I couldn't stop the bad feeling that settled over me. Something about the house didn't seem right, its windows dark and unwelcoming. I grabbed the pizzard and made my way to the door, hoping for a quick exchange so I can get the hell out of there. I knocked 3 times, the sound echoing throughout the night, and it was the only noise being made, which didn't make sense that for some strange reason no insects or animals were making any noises. But anyway, I got no response. I knocked again, louder this time, but still, no one came to the door. I began to become irritated as I debated whether to leave the pizza and go, or try one more time. I said F it, and decided to just leave. Just as I turned to leave, a faint light caught my eye. It wasn't from the house, but rather in the woods a good distance in. Curiosity got the better of me, and looking back on it now, I can see it was pretty stupid of me, but I decided to investigate it. I followed the trail, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of fallen leaves. The woods seemed to close in around me, branches reaching out like skeleton fingers, and it felt as if I were walking into another realm of sorts. Not too long after walking into the path, I stumbled into a clearing, illuminated a lot by a bonfire. My heart hammered in my chest as I witnessed a sight straight from nightmares. A group of robed people surrounded by flickering torches, engaged in some kind of sinister ritual dance. At first, they seemed oblivious to me standing there, as they disturbingly continued what it was they were doing. Right then, I should have turned and ran, and should have left them to do their strange worship in the dead of night, but for some reason I couldn't budge. I guess it could have been from the fear I was feeling at that very moment. It wasn't until one of them, a man wearing a blood-red robe, turned towards me that I realized my mistake. Their eyes met mine, and the chanting abruptly ceased in unison. They turned their heads towards me, their faces obscured by shadows and hoods. Panic surged through me as I started slowly backing up, my foot catching on a root, sending me crashing to the ground. The cult-like group of people advanced towards me as they began cursing and yelling for someone to grab me before I got away, and at one point I could have sworn I heard a woman say that the ritual couldn't be completed without blood. I jumped to my feet, adrenaline fueling my flight instinct. I ran with everything I had in order to escape whatever the hell it was those freaks wanted to do with me, and even had branches clawing at my face and thorns tearing my clothes. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind me, shouts and demands heard as well, as they told each other to catch me. Finally, I burst through the tree line, and the very sight of my car offered me a sign of hope. I threw myself in the driver's seat, reaching in my pocket for the keys as the cult emerged from the woods and were rushing towards my car. But their attempts to stop me came up short, and I managed to start the car and get the hell out of there, dirt flying up behind my car as I sped down the driveway. Only when I was a safe distance away did I dare to look in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the people chasing me down the road, but couldn't see anything due to the dark. And it wasn't until I heard the thump of a flat tire that I realized that that night wasn't over. I began cursing my head off as I pulled over to inspect the tire, and that's when I saw something that scared the hell out of me. After I got out of my car, I would find the tire that was flat, but it wasn't because it was low on air or dry rotted. It was because an arrow that was sticking into it. Someone had sabotaged my car, and how they managed to do it was chilling, and they must have been shooting at me while I was driving off. Who were those robed people, and what dark purpose did their ritual serve, and was I to be a part of it? I didn't stick around to find out. I quickly changed the tire as I continuously looked over my shoulder before speeding away into the night. My boss did call the police, but the only thing they found when going to that place was the bonfire that was still burning and the multiple shoe prints those people left around the property, which turned out to be some guy's vacation home. And to this day, I often wonder if I was lured there to be a possible sacrifice. I'm going to try and write this the best I can, and I am not the best of writers, and my storytelling isn't that good either, so please bear with me. As a pizza delivery guy, I've had my fair share of odd and creepy encounters, but nothing could have prepared me for the horror that awaited me my last night on the job. It was a typical evening shift. I was to deliver a pizza to a residence, receive the money, then head back. Little did I know that this particular delivery would lead me down a dark path of terror and survival. The order came through for a large pepperoni pizza to be delivered to an address I had never seen before. The GPS guided me to the outskirts of town, where there wasn't too many neighboring houses, and the streets became less familiar. The address led me to an old, dilapidated house at the end of a street. A possible robbery should have popped into my mind the moment I pulled up to the place, but in the rush of the job, I brushed off the thought. The house looked abandoned, with boarded-up windows and an overgrown yard that hinted years of neglect. I parked in front of the house, my headlights cutting through the darkness, and it felt as if I were being watched, which gave me a bad feeling. The silence was eerie and made the feeling of that place even more wicked. I grabbed the pizza box and made my way to the front door, my footsteps being the only sound I could hear. And as I approached, the bad feeling I had grew stronger. The place didn't have a front porch light, and the house seemed strange, giving me a creepy vibe, and something in my head was screaming, just get out of there. But I knew I couldn't return to my job without at least trying to give the pizza to the person who ordered it and get the money. So I knocked on the door, hoping for a quick exchange so I can get away from that place. Minutes passed with no response. I knocked again, louder this time, but still, no one answered. I reached for my phone to call the customer, but before I could dial, I heard a voice behind me.
Hey, over here.
I turned to see a man walking from the shadows of the neighboring house. He was a middle-aged man, kind of scruffy and wild-eyed, his clothes tattered as if he'd been living rough.
You got the pizza?
He asked eagerly. Relief flooded through me as I realized he must be the customer. Yeah, I've got it right here, I replied, holding up the pizza box.
Great, come on in,
he said, gesturing for me to follow him towards the other house. I hesitated at first, my instincts telling me something wasn't right. I mean, it was weird, and I didn't understand why it was the address we were at that he used to have the pizza delivered to, and now we're walking over to another house, and the bad feeling was still with me, warning me of danger. But the promise of a quick delivery and a tip urged me to ignore the warning bells ringing in my head. I followed the man into the neighboring house, which was just as run-down and abandoned looking as the first. The air inside was musty and thick, with the scent of decay hanging heavy. My nerves were on edge, but I pushed them aside, focusing on completing the delivery and getting out of there as fast as I could. The man led me to what looked like a makeshift living room area, with old furniture and dimly lit lamps casting a dim glow.
Just set the pizza down on the table,
he said, pointing to a rickety wooden table in the center of the room. I did as instructed, trying to act casual despite the growing sense of dread in my gut. That'll be $20, I replied to him, holding out my hand. The man's smile faltered for a moment before he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled bill. As I took the money, I couldn't help but notice the way his eyes darted around the room, as if he was expecting something or someone. And just as I was about to turn and leave, I heard footsteps behind me, and before I could react, 2 more men emerged from the shadows, blocking my path to the door. They were similarly disheveled, with a menacing look in their eyes that sent a jolt of fear through me.
"Where do you think you're going?"
One of them growled, his voice low and threatening. Panic surged through me as I realized I had walked into a trap. I was pretty stupid to follow the guy into the house and not immediately get back into my car and leave like a smarter person would have. At least, that is what I should have done. But I've been in situations before where people who have lived in abandoned places have ordered pizza, and they've paid me, and I left afterwards not harmed or threatened by them at all. So I figured that this situation would turn out to be the same, until it didn't. And I found myself for the first time in a bad spot. So using the adrenaline that came over me, I struck one of the guys as hard as I could, causing him to fall down before I burst out of the front door and into the night, my breathing at a rapid pace as my heart began to pound. But I didn't stop running until I wrecked my car, starting it up and stomping on the gas, leaving the sounds of my pursuers fading behind me as I peeled out of there, tires screeching on the gravel road. It wasn't until I made it back at the pizzeria that I realized the gravity of what had just happened. I had narrowly escaped being kidnapped, or worse, by a group of deranged men hiding in an abandoned house, and were willing to do who knows what to me. From that night on, I made sure to trust my instincts and never let my guard down, especially when venturing into an unfamiliar and isolated location. I quit my job that very night and found one that doesn't involve me going out alone, and my trust in strangers is now gone, for I don't feel safe anymore, knowing how effed up some people can be.